Thank you very much for being with us on Eco Advance. And I guess the first question is, tell me a little bit about how this came about and how you see it impacting your work overall.
Well, the program that I'm working on is called the Agricultural Sustainability Support and Advisory Program, or ASSAP for short. It came about as a result of Ireland's second River Basin Management Plan. So as you're aware, under the Water Framework Directive, all countries have to have a River Basin Management Plan to meet with the Water Framework Directive objectives. And the first River Basin Management Plan that Ireland had really, was regulatory heavy, wasn't incorporating communities, local knowledge, stakeholder engagement. It was pretty much regulatory driven. So in fairness to the regulatory authorities, the departments, Department of Housing, Local Government and Heritage, and the EPA in Ireland, they went and had a look at it again and decided that they needed to broaden the scope of it to incorporate communities, stakeholders. While the regulatory was important, they felt that was a large area that they were falling down on. Plus, they decided that it was important that we have a much more targeted and focused effort at restoring water quality, as opposed to a kind of a bit of a scattergun approach across the country. And the second River Basin Management Plan proposed two entities. One was ASSAP, as I mentioned a second ago, and the other was LawPro, which is a regulatory body that provides the scientific basis and the scientific investigations in rivers that provide an insight into what is actually happening, what the pressures are, and what's impacting water quality. Once they have that, that's where ASSAP come in. They provide that information to ASSAP. And as I said, ASSAP is an advisory service. It's free to farmers. It's confidential for farmers, and uptake of the service is voluntary. So that's where the advisory service that I'm involved in. So I work with Teagasc. We have 20 advisors on the advisory program, and then also, and this is where I mentioned about community and stakeholder involvement. The dairy co-ops in the country have put forward 24 advisors as well to visit their farms and provide that service for their farms. So that's where the program came from, and that's where we're coming from. So it's a free voluntary advisory service based on strong and robust science provided by LawPro.
So what do you do when you advise?
So LawPro, when they do their investigations in the streams, they try and identify what the pressure is. Is it phosphorus? Is it sediment? Is it nitrogen? Is it pesticides? And once we get that information, they will give us an indicator of what area within that catchment is causing the problem. So based on that information, the advisors then will go and contact the farmers in that area, and they will offer to pay a visit to the farm and to assess their farm to see if there's any practices or any farm management practices going on that are impacting on water quality. So we assess the farm across farmyards, we assess it across nutrient management, we assess it across farm or land management as well, so how they manage the land, because we feel that what we're finding is that the diffuse loss of nutrients is driving water quality in Ireland, more so than the point sources. So the point sources are also there, don't get me wrong, and they need to be tidied up, but it's primarily the diffuse loss of nutrients. In about over 70% of the cases that we have is diffuse phosphorus, sediment, or nitrogen that's impacting the water quality. So once we go out, we go assess the farm, we talk to the farmers, we highlight or identify a few issues, and then we come up with a plan with the farmer, in agreement with the farmer, as to what he or she can do to mitigate against the loss of those contaminants to the water network.
Well, how does the scientific support work?
So the scientific support works in that LawPro provide, they've developed a system and a methodology of taking a whole lot of information that would be gathered through regular monitoring programs from the EPA or local authorities in the country. They take all that, they look at it, they take geological information, they take soil maps information, they do a whole lot of background information, a depth study, whatever way you want to call it. So they have a good idea as to what the soil type is, what's the likely pathways, what's the likely pressures. And then once they have that, they go out and they assess water bodies. So these water bodies are identified based on national monitoring data. These are water bodies that are not meeting their Water Framework Directive targets of good status. So they're moderate or poor status, and we're trying to move them in the right direction. So they go out, they do their they do their stream assessments then, where they use simple physiochemical parameters, BOD, orthophosphorus, nitrate concentrations, and also then they look at the ecological side of it as well. So they do kick samples, so to get a kind of small they count the macroinvertebrates, for want of a better way of putting it, and they come up with a score as to say how impacted this river is at a certain point in time. So once they identify an impacted area of the stream, that then equates to it being impacted by phosphorus or sediment or nutrient or pesticides, whatever the contaminant is. And that information then is shared back to us as advisors to influence and direct us as to where we go to visit which farms. So, you could have a water body with 50 farms, but it may only be in one part of the water body where the problem is occurring for whatever reason. And those maybe 10 farms or 5 farms are where we go and we target our visits.
So what changes have you seen over the years? This program has been working for how many years, and how have things changed?
Yeah, it's been working since 2019. So how have things changed? So I think that the first thing is kind of maybe on a large scale. Certainly, we feel that we've managed to change the dial and to move the dial a bit on the advice, the general agricultural advice that would have been given to farmers around nutrient use, particularly at the shorter periods of the year. So when I talk about the shorter periods of the year, I talk about the early growing period of grass growing period. So in Ireland, that would be kind of late January, February, March is when you start to see grass growing. And then the end period of the year, which would be now September, October, into November. So, your grass growth is poor at those shorter periods of the year, and during the summer you have a much better grass growth. So we have managed to move the dial on that, where advice would have been to get your nutrient out as early as you could, so as to get grass growing. Now it's much more nuanced and much more tempered, based on grass growth rates, based on soil temperatures, based on weather conditions, based on soil moisture deficits. All that kind of thing is now being factored in into it. And then on the converse, during the summer, where you have drought conditions, again, we've managed to change the dial a little bit on that to dial back on your fertilizer applications. So I suppose, the conversation on water quality has become a little bit more mainstream. It is moved from just production and profitability to including the environmental messages. And that's not just water quality, that's also with regards to gaseous emissions and biodiversity as well. So certainly in those 5 years that we were up and running since 2018, 2019, you can certainly see that the environmental conversation has become much more part of the mainstream agriculture discourse. When an advisor goes and visits a farmer, it's part of the conversation. Now, not saying that this is perfect or anything, we've a long way to go. We still need it better and more more regular and stronger messaging, but we certainly have gone from a very low base to improving that. Then I suppose from our point of view, what we are seeing from the EPA data that they're showing is that the areas that we are working in, they're called priority areas for action. Water quality has improved at a greater rate in those than in the nationally. So we've had a greater improvement. Now, that's been tempered by losses in other PAAs that we're working in as well. So it's not Disney, it's not all a happy ending. We've had some wins, we've had some where we haven't gotten improvements in water quality. And I think what we really learned out of this is how complex and how difficult it is to actually realize water quality improvements. There are so many multiple factors going on that can influence water quality. And I think this project has certainly enlightened the scientists, the researchers, advisors, and farmers as to how complex it is, how difficult it is to realize improvements. Science is one thing, but behaviors and attitudes and barriers to improvement of water quality, we need to understand those as well, and how to work away around those, and to get farmers to change behaviors, change things. Regulation is one way of doing it, but you do need to look at how you influence farmers, how you get them to change their attitudes and their behaviors. And there's always a range. Some farmers, early adapters, they will absolutely lap these things up and work away and get things done. And then you have others that are the other end of the spectrum as well. So, you know, it's really challenging, but it's really exciting, because when you do get positive results, it's great. Like we've had some water bodies that have gone from attained good status that haven't had good status in 25 years, you know, these kind of things. So that's great. That keeps you going. But obviously then there's other ones where we're not having as much success. So look, it's a work in progress.
Well, when you say water quality, I guess you're really meaning freshwater restoration. It's not a restoration project where you go take a bulldozer. It's a different kind of restoration project. And when people are thinking about restoration that isn't bulldozer oriented or isn't necessarily hydromorphological, what kind of advice would you give them in trying to start something that is going to be meaningful over the long term?
Yeah, and look, I suppose we had to figure all this out. You know, it was certainly the first in Ireland. The project, the type of project, the way we structured it, was certainly the first in Ireland, and I'd imagine there's been similar projects in other countries in Europe, but maybe not to the scale that we're doing it here in Ireland. I think you need to throw the net really wide and get as many people into the room, and you know, communities, stakeholders, farmers, government agencies, NGOs, all those need to be part of the conversation. And what we've done in the ASSOP is, you know, it's obviously state funded and state backed by the Departments of Agriculture and Department of Housing, and obviously some EU funding as well in there as well. But you really need to bring the community. So we made a big effort to bring in through LawPro. So LawPro have a community kind of an arm, community water officers they're called. So they have worked at making sure local groups that we're working on are well informed and know what's going on. They have an influence and a part to play. And this is not just in the work that we're doing in ASSOP, but also in the Water Framework Directive plans that we're putting together and the local catchment plans that are being put together. So people feel an ownership of water quality in their area. And it's not just something that somebody else is worrying about. This is something that the community are actively working on and trying to improve. So that's the community side of it. The other side of it then is we put a massive effort in making sure that the farmers are on board. So we spent a lot of time at the start of the program talking, negotiating, engaging with the farming organizations. And that was a lot of hard work, but it has reaped dividends massively, because the farming organizations were, you know, obviously representing their farmer clients, and were a little bit cautious, wary of people going around their farms wondering, was this cause inspections and cause penalties and so on and so forth. So we managed to smooth out any of those issues, and we have great support from the farming organizations as it stands with ASSOP. So that's a massive improvement, or a massive achievement, I think, for the program, that we have such cross-sectoral support. As we said, the main industry that we've gotten involved is the dairy industry. I suppose if there was one little thing that maybe we didn't do as well is the other sectors. So the tillage and the beef and dry stock sectors, you know, maybe are a little bit under industry, are a little bit underrepresented on the program. I suppose the main reason for that is because the co-ops were putting their hand in their pocket and were actually putting advisors on the ground, whereas that hasn't happened. The structure of the beef and tillage isn't the same as the dairying, and it was a little bit more difficult for them to provide support in that manner. But look, we have been engaging with them, and we're hopeful that we have supported them as well. So that's important.
Now, if you have any suggestions for the European Commission or for your government to enable more and successful restoration projects like this or others?
Yeah, look, I think a couple of things that we got right. You know, we have the science based information that LawPro is providing us. I think that's absolutely crucial. So we know what's impacting in the water bodies that we're working in. So I think a strong scientific basis for this. And maybe we'll come to it later on as well, but the EPA have put a lot of resources into the mix for us around PIP maps, pollution impact potential maps for nitrogen and phosphorus, and then overland flow pathway maps as well. And look, maybe we'll come to those in a few minutes, but that kind of support, that kind of science is absolutely crucial to being able to achieve anything. Second thing is that you have an advisory service, a dedicated advisory service. So we have a dedicated advisory service that are just advising on water quality. The organization I work for, we're an advisory body, but the mainstream advisors cover everything, beef, sheep, scheme work, all that kind of thing. So that they have a lot of pressures on their time. Whereas the ASP advisors are solely for visiting farms and talking to farmers about water quality. So it's dedicated. So I think that's a very important part of it, that we have that. And that breeds expertise, and it breeds knowledge, and it breeds all those kind of things that you would expect when you're dedicated to a job 100% of the time. So that's the second thing. The other thing then I think that's worked really well is that we have targeted, very specific targeting of where these measures go. So it's the catchphrase is getting the right measure in the right place. Hither before ASSUP, it was a scattergun approach. One farmer could do something through an environmental scheme, but the farmer across the river from him or her may not be doing that and could be impacting negatively. So the work that one farmer is doing is being negated by the farmer across. So overall, you weren't getting a water quality increase in a water body. It was just doing nothing. So that is not the case with ASSUP. We target all farmers, and of course it is voluntary, but we've had very good engagement for farmers, and we've very good uptake of measures. So we're happy with that. So that's the kind of maybe the third thing there on the specific targeting of measures. The final thing I would say is when we started up on this, we were working at measures that go above and beyond regulation. So these are, you have your regulatory requirements, but we were asking farmers to do things that were supplementary to that, over and above it. And we're asking them to do that out of their own pocket as well. So, that was a problem for us, in that, while we got good uptake from a lot of farmers, they did these things out of their own pockets. Whereas now, in the coming couple of months, we're going to have, we secured some funding through the through an EIP, a European Innovation Partnership, Water EIP we're calling it, where we have some funding now from Europe and backed up by the Exchequer in Ireland as well, that we can provide compensation or provide assistance to farmers that are putting in measures to cover the cost of those measures. It's not an income support scheme or anything like that. It's just directly to cover the cost of measures that they are putting in.
So finally, what's your key message in terms of the things that you've done and others can learn from to implement these kinds of activities?
Yeah, look, I think we kind of them all covered from the start, but just to reiterate, I think getting a broad consensus across all the key stakeholders, government, industry, regulatory, community, farming, advisory, all those, you need to get everybody into the room and everybody talking together and everybody on a common path and a common trajectory. You really need to have very solid science backing you up. You need to know what's causing the problems, where that is happening, and you need to know how to fix them. What's the mitigation actions? What do you advise a farmer to do? I think you need to have in place some sort of, if these are measures that go, as I said, above and beyond regulation, you certainly need to have some form of an EIP or some form of funding to help farmers cover the costs of the measures you're asking them to do. And I think then they need to be very, very targeted. You need to know where you're going with these things. So I think them are the kind of the key learnings that I would say from my experience working in ASSUP that would be useful to people in Europe and beyond as to how to approach a project like this.
Okay, well, thank you very, very much. Really appreciate it.